Of course, and thank you to everybody out there who has joined us tonight to celebrate the great experiment, CSU at 150, the documentary film that was just released in October of this year. And we're so delighted to have all of the characters, I'm going to call you characters tonight, who were involved in the creation of this amazing film join us and kind of give us a deep dive into the making of it. And I know that this is challenging times for everyone for many different reasons. And I just want to acknowledge how much we appreciate you taking the time to join us to celebrate Colorado State University and our history this evening. I know we're all here because we love Colorado State, and to be able to go back in time at the very beginning and look at all of the great moments in our alma mater's history has just been fantastic. And I'm glad that we can all forget about 2020 for just a little bit and go back and celebrate all of this. I will remind all of our participants that the best way to ask questions and get interaction going is through our chat feature and the question and answer feature. All participants, except for those that you see on the screen, are muted with your camera off. So that is the best way to interact. And I'm wondering if we can even get that started now. If you wouldn't mind, if you're on, let us know your name and your grad year perhaps, and where you're calling in from tonight. And when you do that, if you can make sure to click on all participants, not just the presenters, then everybody who's on the screen will know who has joined us for the evening. We had over 120 people registered from all over the United States, which is awfully exciting. As we looked at the demographic of who was joining, we had over 90 members of the Alumni Association who had joined too. So I would be totally remiss if I just didn't say thank you so much for those of you who are members. Your vote of confidence through your membership of your alma mater really, really does make a big difference at Colorado State University. Now, I was a math major for one semester, so that means there were about 30 of you out there who haven't decided to join us yet in membership. So check it out. I think that my colleague, Lisa Hansen, is going to be posting information with our website so you can learn all about what's happening in the Alumni Association and join us in membership if you're so inclined. I just mentioned Lisa. Lisa, can you turn your camera on one quick second so everybody gets to meet you? Lisa is in charge of our engagement and programs with the Alumni Association. She's a proud graduate of Colorado State University. There she is, and is the one who really thought of this program and putting it all together so that our alumni could learn more about this documentary. So Lisa, thank you so much for your effort. And Lisa's going to be running the chat this evening as well. And she would be mad at me if I didn't say, come back and join us in other programs. I know next week we have cooking class at the Kendall Reagan Nutrition Center. There's always a whole host of things that you can get involved in. So please do join us. I should have introduced myself. You can probably see my name on my screen, but I'm Christy Bullender. I'm the Executive Director of the Alumni Association and a proud two-time graduate of Colorado State University, and am thrilled to serve you all through the Alumni Association. Lisa is also going to put in the chat if you have any problems with technology, how to access her and how we can be a resource. We'll also be sending out a survey after this program that we'd love for you to respond to, and other resources that you may need as an alum. With all of those kind of notes of rules of engagement for this evening out of the way, let's get into the heart of our program. And you are seeing some delightful faces on your screen right now who you'll get to meet in just a moment. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our host of this evening, John Hearn, class of 1993. That means that John and I graduated the very same year, actually had the pleasure of meeting each other. I do believe we were freshmen, and John had the knack, even back then as a student, of going out with his metal detector over the Old Main space, looking for historical facts from our past. So it is no surprise to me that here we are all of these years later, and you're still actively involved in preserving Colorado State University history. John is the honorary historian for Colorado State University athletics. Athletics is really his expertise, and has put on some amazing programs for the Alumni Association in the past around athletics. You probably have seen him at different sporting events or different places. John, I hope you know how much we appreciate all you do for Colorado State and how proud I am to still be affiliated with you after all of these years. So with that, I'm turning it over to you, John.
In the old athletic department, and I always waved you and go see John Glass or Gary Ozella or somebody else, and that's where we met.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, John, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce everybody else.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We have with us the filmmakers of the Great Experiment, CSU at 150. We are now 150 years old, and I am proud to say that I am 100 years younger than the university. So we're going to kick it off, and we're going to just go around the room and tell everybody who each other is. I'll start with Frank Boring, who I got to meet about 3 years ago when we started working on the project for athletics.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you very much for inviting us to this. My name is Frank Boring, and if you've thought about the jokes, believe me, I've heard them already, but we did make a boring documentary. Had to say that. I was brought here in 2016 by Joe Parker to show one of my documentaries about the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, and that led to a conversation between Ed Warner and Tony Frank about what we would do about the 150. So here we are at the end of the line. Took 3 years to do it, and you'll be meeting some of the people that were involved in it. But thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you, Ed. And we're going to switch over to Blake Miller. Blake?
Hello, everyone. I'm Blake Miller. I actually have lived here quite a while, and my dad was a professor at CSU in the 70s and 80s, and ended up finishing his career up in Alaska for the extension program. And Robbie Ackerman, who's my associate, who did most of the writing of the scripts and everything, and the graphics and all the great layouts of that kind of thing. And we've worked as a team together for many, many years, producing quite a few different documentaries, from ski films with Warren Miller to Bureau of Reclamation films for the government, and many, many more, some X Games stuff and that kind of stuff. But that's been a lot of my background, doing that kind of thing. And I'm really happy to be here and share some stories about this film with all you guys.
Great. And then we're going to turn it over to Ed and Jackie. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Ed, Jackie.
Do you want me to begin, honey?
No, I'm class of 68. Jackie is the only honorary alumna in the history of the university. We've got a great big plaque on the wall somewhere, about that. And we were the executive producers of the documentary, which means that we were donors. And Frank and I also worked on the fundraising, a lot of which support came from our chancellor, Tony Frank.
Great. Well, thank you. And we're just going to kick it off with some questions. When everyone signed up for the event, they were able to ask some questions. So I've got a list of questions here that we're going to start off with. And this one's really more for the entire group. How many people were involved total in making this film? That would be people that you interviewed along with people behind the scenes.
Well, my math is really bad, but if you look at the credits, you'll see a huge number. The ones that, from the very beginning, I wanted to make sure that we were going to be historically accurate. And so if you look at the CSU story, it's really the story of Fort Collins and CSU. And so there are historians involved. There's a number of students involved. So just the interviews alone, I think we did over 30 or more interviews. Blake, what do you think? How many think we actually?
Well, I can say that, in the soundtrack, we gave each person their own soundtrack. There were some parts in there, like some music. We had about 5 tracks for that and stuff. Well, we had 78 tracks in the film. So I would say there was probably about 60 people that were interviewed, some of which were from archives. But, you know, I know we did up probably more than 30 interviews. I would say closer to 50, but there was quite a few different people involved, and then a lot of great crew members and people from, you know, our crew, which, you know, the people that actually worked on the film, you know, including all of us, there was probably about 15, you know, people involved in the production side of it. Yeah.
So let's say there was 150 for one for every year.
There we
That's
go.
probably, yeah.
One for every year the school's been around. Sure.
But
Well, there was a
prior
lot of
to-
footage from,
Prior to the film being made, as we'll probably talk about at certain points, we hired a number of students to help digitize and to identify a lot of the film footage that you eventually saw in the documentary. So it's important to note that we really involved a lot of CSU students from all the different colleges over the course of 3 years.
Sure.
and with all the archive footage that we used, there were probably a lot of different people that filmed some of that we weren't really sure who they were, you know, from really old stuff way back. And, you know, so there was, you know, if you count all those, there probably were more than 150, but we'll go with 150. Okay.
Right.
There we go. Good. Well, are there any behind the scenes scoop, any behind the scenes stories to share that everybody out there would like to hear?
Well, I know that going on campus was difficult, which many of you probably know. And so finding parking passes and all that kind of stuff. So one thing we did was we bought a trailer for a bike so we could put all our camera gear and ride around without having to have a parking permit every time we went on campus. I don't know. Is that interesting?
No, we've all been hit by the parking people on campus. So that,
Yeah.
Frank, I remember you showed me a room full of videotapes, and were there some other things that are real discoveries that you found while you're behind the scenes there?
Yeah, I think that, you know, from the very beginning, Ed and I and others that were involved in this, and this is something we made very clear to Tony from the very beginning. Before the film actually started, I made this very obvious statement: you can't do a documentary film without film. And the Instructional Services was a company, actually an internal group within the Clark building that actually shot footage, that edited footage, that had a graphic design and titling and all that. And the good news was that they were very professional. And so in the very beginning, it was shot on 16 millimeter, and then eventually it was shot onto 1 inch, which is what ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS was using, and then 3/4 inch tape, which was the next level, and eventually Beta SP. And so we knew that we had good quality stuff. It wasn't home movies per se, it was really professionally shot. But as we found out, the master log disappeared. So we didn't know what was on those tapes. And so behind the scenes, before the film even started, we had to track down old equipment. I had to find a person who actually was working for CSU, was retired, that actually could fix the equipment and service the equipment. His name was Kevin Beard. And so we were able to eventually start to look at some of this stuff and see that, oh my God, there's Andy Warhol was here, and football games and all that kind of stuff. So really the behind the scenes story was the preservation of the history and the making of the film.
Yeah, the backstory, John, more than anything else, was that we realized, and Frank is an expert at this, that in order to produce a good historical documentary, we needed to do a bunch of preservation work, and we had to do it in parallel. And Tony, Frank, and donors came forward and donated. So you're going to ask sometime down the road about the cost of this, and the cost of the documentary is actually, I think, a little bit less than what we ended up spending on preservation of CSU's history.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, that makes sense. And that kind of leads to another question that we had, and it's really more for Frank, because I believe everybody here graduated from CSU or has been a part of CSU. Frank, you came into Fort Collins, CSU. You didn't really know the university. How hard was it to get caught up on the history and the culture of what Colorado State University is?
Well, it's a very good question. Every project that I've had to take on, most of the films I've ever made are historical films, so I had to do research. But the advantage I had was that Jim Hansen, emeritus professor of history who wrote Democracy's College, I found out he had written a 2-volume work, so I immediately tracked him down. I immediately went to the 3 historians in town for the CSU, for the Fort Collins CSU history, and I had a whole history department here at CSU. So really I immersed myself in the history by not only reading, but also talking to the very people who knew better than I did anything, including you, because you along with Gary Azello and Tony Pfeiffer, were really going to be able to steer me in the direction of how do I deal with the sports part. But Jim Hansen and a man named Gordon Haphazard were probably the key people who had written extensively and pointed me in the direction of the people that I needed to talk to and the people that I needed to spend time with to learn the story of CSU.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense. What would each one be the most proud of about making this film? What part of this film would bring in your most prideful moment? We'll start with Ed and Jackie.
The bear.
The bear. 1919.
The legend that there was no documentation about the burning of Old Main and Frank found it. I thought that was amazing. The film footage of the early agricultural history, photographs, and some very old film. Well, that stuff was absolutely marvelous.
The women, oh my God, there were women? You allowed women in the school? Very cool.
I lived in Corbett Hall, so that was a woman, Corbett, Virginia Corbett, so yes.
Yeah, that's great. That was a highlight for me.
Great. Blake, what would be one of yours?
Well, there's just so many things in the film, and I think to answer that, really, I would say that the way that we were able to wrangle all this different stuff and actually pare it down to a flowing story that kind of brought you through all the time. I know there was tons of things that we missed, but I feel pretty proud of all the different aspects. And, and that came from a lot from the feedback from everybody, from the CSU 150 committee to all the different historians and people that were able to keep us on the right path with the history and just that accomplishment of how everybody worked together. That was pretty amazing to me, I think. Yeah.
Frank, how about you?
Well, there's several, but I'll play off of what Blake just said. One of the running jokes I use whenever I made presentations about the project over the course of 3 years, I would always get a laugh about. And that was, I would say that I was hired to do 150 years of CSU history at 86 minutes and 40 seconds.
Yeah.
And we did. That totally amazes me. And a lot of that has to do with Blake and the CSI Films team, because we had hours of stuff. And then to cut things out, things that I just could not picture, that we couldn't take it out, and we had to take it out because we ran out of time to do it. But as Blake said, I think that it was amazing that we were able to tell this story in that amount of time.
Great. Well, we had a question come in from somebody who's on right now, and it was, what was the most surprising fact or story that was found during this documentary? And we'll start with Blake on that one.
Wow, so many. I mean, I can't even begin to say how many there were, but
what was the one that you liked the most?
Well, I really loved the early stories of the women's basketball.
Yeah.
And the first black guy Grafton Sinclair in the early part, and just some of the things that CSU did early on to find out how this town was really progressive for the time. To me, that was kind of amazing, I thought. And the women in the West, they were some tough girls. And, so hearing some of those stories, I think, I don't know, like that wasn't just one, but, that early history of the people that you wouldn't have expected, I think, to a certain degree, how much contribution they had.
Yeah.
How about you, Frank?
This is probably my favorite story, but I agree with Blake that there's just so many that we could just go on and on and on about. But I was in the Special Collections Library office of Gordon Haphazard. And I had gone to Gordon Hazard. He's an alumni, but he's also the president of the Fort Collins Historical Society. And so I relied on him a lot from the very beginning to ask him, who should I talk to? Who are the important people I should talk to? And since the Oval is such an important part of the whole culture of CSU, this is in the very beginning. This is probably the first year I was here. I said to him, the Oval is just, an amazing thing. Who do I need to talk to about that? And he said, well, Ken Goldsberry, who was a retired horticulture professor, was just in here doing some research on that. You should talk to him. He's about 80 some odd years old, but I think he's going to be fine. In fact, Frank, he just had lunch with his old professor. And I said, what? Wait a minute, what do you mean old professor? He goes, yeah, Carl Jorgensen is still alive. He's 104 years old. Wow. And so he was in a nursing home, immediately went out there. He was articulate. You see him in the film, but it turns out that Carl Jorgensen was not only the person who saved the Oval from the disease during that time, but he also became Fort Collins' first arborist. And we have him to thank for all of the trees and the shrubs that we have in Fort Collins. And because I went out to interview him, the Rocky Mountain Student Media went out and interviewed him. The Coloradoan went out and interviewed him, and he died within a month of that. But at least at the last part of his life, he was recognized. And I'm so glad that we got his story because it was amazing.
That's great. That's really great. Ed and Jackie, how about you? What was the most surprising fact that you had found or that you saw out of the whole thing?
I think that with all of the, let's say, angst about diversity at CSU, I discovered that we were diverse from the get-go, from the beginning. I can go around bragging that 1/3 of the first graduating class was female. That was 1 out of 3, but come on, that's what math is for. And that at a time when Blacks were not allowed in white universities, we ignored that. I mean, for me, that was a very big deal that we had a history that went right back to the beginning of embracing diversity.
That's great. Jackie?
Yeah, I'd have to concur with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we did have a question that came across, and it follows up on what Frank had said. What was one piece that you wish you would have kept in the film that you had to not have in there?
Well, Blake, I came up with I thought was a very clever little joke, and when we talked about this, we got this from Gordon Haphazard. When Spruce Hall was built, there were 3 floors, and they had women on one floor and men on the other floor. And the men would dangle a string with a rock and a note on the window, basically asking for a date. Will you go out with me? And then they would respond and go up. And we cut to Gordon Hazard saying, that was an early example of text messaging.
Yeah. Yeah, we did cut that out.
That is a good story too. I've known that story for a long time. That's a good.
It was my joke.
The film was 97 minutes at one point, so it was quite a bit longer than what it needed to be. So, and at that, we had to really chop some things out. But the guy that I liked was what's his name? Vince, or was that his name? The guy who made the robot.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What was his name?
Now,
I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss. But he created the
yeah.
first animatronic.
Yeah.
That was kind of an interesting story. I like that.
Yeah.
But we still have a lot of that stuff that maybe we can share later down the road, you know.
Great, great. Well, you know, I'll get this one to Ed and Jackie. What was the best part and the worst part about working on this project?
Well, the best part is working with Frank Boring. Frank and I go back a long time, not nearly as long as Frank and Jackie, who met in Western New York when Frank left his home city of Taipei, Taiwan, to go to college in Western New York. But so I was introduced to Frank through my wife, and he's an amazing guy. He's a playwright. He's a very creative talent, and we really hit it off. I have absolutely no artistic talent, and Frank has absolutely no math skills. So, you know, we found that we made a reasonably good team, and became good friends. And he made a documentary on the Flying Tigers that nobody else could have made. His father knew the Flying Tigers. He grew up knowing them as a little kid. And I thought that documentary was a treasure. And so when Frank went to Michigan to a university, I was already interested in history. I believe all of us here, I don't know about all the alumni, would recognize that this country is struggling with a lack of understanding of our own history, that it's not taught very well. People don't seem to know what's going on. You remember the old, I don't know, Letterman or Johnny Carson skit where they go out in the street and ask people who George Washington was, and people wouldn't know. That really bothered me. So supporting history through documentaries was very appealing to me, especially Frank's involvement with the Veterans Library of Congress oral histories, which I couldn't believe that Frank could open up a dialogue with interviewees and get them to talk about their combat history, something they had never done. I mean, it's so traumatic, they clammed up. And I thought how wonderful that is, that this is now recorded, and their children and grandchildren, maybe even their great grandchildren, can see Grandpa talking about part of American history that they might not even had known growing up with him. I thought that was a marvelous thing.
Yeah.
Frank, yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
Just that I think it's really important for students coming in and also the ones that have graduated to see the evolution of this ag school that started out with, you know, not much, a small building and a lot of dirt, but it's really evolved to a fantastic extent, and it's encouraging and open to people who wouldn't normally go to college. Sometimes they're the first people in their school, and so that was important to me. That was a highlight for me, to have Frank bring some of that material forward, the process of it, the history of it, because I think that's important.
Sure.
To the college.
I know, working with Frank on the athletic stuff, really enjoyed working on it with him, and a real professional. And, you know, one story that I want to share is, you know, when they went to interview me, they had one of those slates in front of me that clamps down, you know. I made the big time when they said, "All right, John Hearn, take one," you know. It was, that's professional. Well, Frank, I had a question that just came across here.
Yeah.
Do we have enough outtakes to make a whole outtake show of people messing up and some funny things that happened during the filming?
We easily could. Blake and I have talked about this. Blake and Robbie and I and the team, we've got great stuff. And also, I think an important thing for the alumni is that we got a lot of outtakes that are not just funny, but just didn't make it in the film, that were already edited. Mm-hmm. This could easily have been divided up into 3 sections. It could have been the early days, then the Laurie years and the Morgan years, and then the modern age. And we could have done a whole series of 3. So there were some pretty funny moments in it, but mainly just technical things. You know, you ask a question and then the sound was off, and so you had to stop and then repeat the question. And but overall, it was the CSI Films was a real pleasure to work with. You know, you say that the high points and the low points. One of the difficulties that we had from the very beginning, and this is, I mean, it's not meant as a criticism, but it took a long time to get through the process of hiring CSI Films. You know, we had to put it out to bid. There was a place in Boston that said that they were to come into CSU for 1 week, do interviews, grab the stuff, go back and deliver the documentary. 1 week, they were going to be here. And we had
much time at all, right?
Yeah. So yeah, we finally did get through all those hurdles, and CSI Films got hired. And in many ways, they had more to lose than anybody else because they're both alumni. You know, both Robbie and Blake's fathers worked here. They had a lot of friends in this town. And so I was very pleased that we finally did get CSI Films to be the ones to make this film.
Sure. Blake, getting back to the other question I had, best part, worst part, what would be one of the hardest or worst parts that was a challenge while making this film?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a learning progress, you know, in during the whole process. It was, you know, we just had so much to old stories, and it was like a giant pile, you know, and whittling it down was like really a challenge. You know, and deciding what were the good stories, and, you know, Frank did an excellent job of, you know, outlining things for us and kind of breaking it down. So that whole process of refining the stories and then not only having these stories, but figuring out how each part flowed together. We ended up, Robbie did a masterful job with the script writing, and you know, from a lot of, my brother actually helped write, and Frank, of course, wrote a lot of the initial stuff, but Robbie masterfully took it and just made it flow so nicely from section to section. And we broke it down into just a lot of different little small stories. So when you watch the film, you kind of get that feel. Each one is just you know, nothing really got real deep into the stories because they were, you know, it would have taken too long to really tell all the backstory and everything. So just figuring out which little pieces to say and how to tell the story so they were complete was a real challenge. And I got to give Robbie and Frank the credit for bringing a lot of that together. And Noelle, she was a real big contributor too, and helping refine a lot of that stuff. And Brian Rayburn finding all the amazing assets. That was just really a challenge. I mean, if you could imagine, it's hard to say, but, you know, from that room of videotapes and films and pictures and all the stuff from the library, the Morgan Library, and just whittling it down and going through all that stuff but I found myself at night many times just lost in these stories, and they take you down these rabbit holes where you end up reading all this stuff about different things that happened around here. And it was crazy. But yeah, I don't know. Does that answer the question?
No, that's a very good one. It actually kind of leads into a question we had from somebody who's tuning in right now. And that is, for the next 150 years, how can we continue to capture our history, protect it, preserve it for, you know, from 2020 onward? What's, as you guys have gone through this whole thing, what's the best way to do it? Frank, you raised your hand.
Oh, I've been saying this ever since I've been doing interviews for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. When I first got here, I made a point to do as many interviews as possible with people that would never make it in the documentary, but needed to be preserved. I think CSU needs an active oral history project. I think they need to identify those professors, those students, those staff members, okay? Not just the academics, but the people who are in you know, I made it a point that we did an interview with Al Powell, who is, one of the people that came here when there was only 3 online courses. And then by the time he retired, count the number that are out there. Alan Sneesby, who's in the film, classroom support. A professor walks into a room and hits a button, it doesn't work. And the next thing you know, Alan's group is out there fixing it. Those people's stories need to be preserved. And it's so cheap today with digital technology. When I was doing documentary films back in the days of the 80s, you had all this huge equipment. You had to cart around all these tapes. I mean, there should be, I think, a concerted effort on the part of CSU to get as many oral history interviews as possible, not just with the academics, not just with the alumni of the emeritus, but the alumni, and they should be doing it with people that really make this place work.
That's a good answer. And as somebody with a degree in history, I can definitely concur with what you said there. As Professor Leindecker, who was my advisor and one of my favorite professors, he said, never miss an opportunity to ask somebody a question. And that's a perfect example there. Well, great. One question that did come in is, since you finished the film, is there anything that's come in afterwards that you said, oh man, I really wish we could have put that into the film? Blake, Frank, Ed, have anything that's kind of come across and you wish you could have put it in since it's come out?
Well, I can answer one part of this. We didn't really see anything. The one that the curveball for us was coronavirus. I had the ending. We had a brand new president. We were going to celebrate that, and it's going to be the high point of the film. Was that off we go into the future, and then coronavirus hit. And Blake can speak to that too, because it really hit us with a curveball. Blake?
Yeah, I mean, I liked that we were able to include a lot of 2020. I felt like, at first we were supposed to finish the film in like January of 2020. And I felt like, we needed to include a little bit of 2020 in it. And as things started to happen, it kind of slowed us up a little bit, and we ended up having to continue to work. And we moved into remote, working, and which was a challenge in itself. And, with video files and all the stuff across the internet is really difficult. And so we were traveling around sharing hard drives, all this kind of stuff. But, then the coronavirus and all these different things, it just seemed so interesting how all these things kind of came around. Like in the beginning of the story, we were talking about the 1918 pandemic, and then in the 70s, the unrest with the civil rights and all that, and how all that kind of started happening again. It was just really interesting. And I felt like those kind of things being included in this story were really good. And, I think, there's probably more that we could have included that's happened in 2020, because it's been a really insane year, as we all know. So I guess that's the beginning of the next 150, like somebody was talking about. So it starts off with pretty crazy times right now. And yeah, gosh.
Okay. Well, great. I do have a question here that is, that one of the things that is popular, that was popular in the film, is all the neat little animations. You had a buggy going down College Avenue. You had the mustaches flipping of the old presidents, and George Toomey's broken collarbone, and nice little lighthearted thing. Whose idea was it to do that?
Well, I think that I can say that we always, Robbie and myself, have made many films together, and I'm always saying we need to have a little bit of funny stuff in there. And he's just a master at finding those nuggets. And, when he did the mustache thing, I mean, he would say something to me like, should I do this? And I'm like, yeah, and when I watch the film now, all those little things are really great. We with the buggy, we're always trying to think of a way to create something that, gives it a little bit different feel and stuff. So we were looking around and we found some you know, you see these Ken Burns movies and stuff, and, you know, he does a masterful job with old pictures and stuff. And so we wanted to do a few things that were a little different. And so we have a friend named Dave that I don't know his last name. I'm so sorry, but he's a 3D animator too. So we kind of got him involved with helping us do some of these effects that we found online that we had seen from some old footage from Germany and stuff like that. And so that's, you know, and so really to give the credit where credit's due, I give it to Robbie. I mean, Robbie is just a really talented, creative person who brings so much to the storytelling, and I like to just let him go because he really comes up with some amazing stuff. Robbie Ackerman.
Yeah.
His dad was a professor with my dad in forestry department. And so we've been friends since he was 2 years old. I was a little older than him. And so I used to get him all rowdy all the time. And his mom would call me up and say, hey, come over here and calm this kid down. So, but Robbie's a talented guy, been a friend a long time. So, yeah.
Great. Well, another question that we had that came in ahead of the when people registered was, how much money did it cost to produce this film? People are interested in knowing, you know, what does it take to produce something like this from the financial aspect of everything? And Ed, I'll start with you on that one, since you're the executive producer, Ed and Jackie.
Well, yeah, I'm the guy with the math. The film itself cost about 300 grand. Which is typical of very high-end documentary films, working with people like CSI, about $100,000 a year to develop a 3-year film. We had spent that much previously, Frank and I, on, for instance, Women in Baseball. I think that might have run almost that much. But the entire budget, including all of our fundraising, ran in excess of $700,000. And that was because we had put so much effort into preservation.
Okay. So like the films and everything that was found, and Brian, like Frank was saying, that was part of that 700,000.
And not to put in a, you know, a kudos to anybody that the alumni don't know, but Tony Frank was a wonderful partner for us in this entire project. Tony stepped forward. He backstopped our fundraising. He was very enthusiastic about the project as president and then as chancellor. So thank you, Tony.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Tony.
Yeah, Tony has a very good sense of the whole university and what it takes to preserve for lifetime generations to come. So that's great.
John, if I could just intersect one thing that I said earlier, and it's very important. Since the very beginning, the first time I ever met Tony Frank before I got hired, and all the way through the 3 years, I kept saying the same mantra over and over again. You can't make a film without the preservation. And so the preservation was always at the forefront. And that was my whole argument, was that, you know, yeah, we could go out and find stuff, you know, we could find B-roll of things that are not CSU and pretend like they're CSU. But when we found out we had this incredible amount of film and tapes that were the actual events here, it took a while to get people to really get behind it and realize that, you know, I got hired as a documentary filmmaker. What am I doing with preservation? That's not my job. And I said, no, that is my job. I've got to convince people that we have to preserve that stuff. And John, you know as well as I do, there's still a whole bunch of tapes sitting up in the Clark building that have not been digitized.
Yeah, there's a lot of tapes.
John, let me just say, you alumni and the public in general doesn't really understand that there's a crisis out there in terms of preservation of our history. And that goes way beyond CSU. I'm on the boards of both the Smithsonian and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And the Smithsonian has just spent 2 years, and they have preserved and digitized 1.8 million items. And that's 3% of their collections. 3%. And they're in a consortium of 12 of the greatest science museums in the world. And God knows if it'll ever be done, but in the process, Scientists and historians around the world will have access to this that they've never had before, because it will be in an online accessible collections that will be, I mean, like right now, you got to go to the Smithsonian and sit in an office and work, you know, behind the scenes to get anything out of it. And that's going to change. But in the meantime, we're losing old film and old video because it's falling apart.
Yeah.
Frank, I believe you said there's something like a shelf life to videotape or something like that. It's gonna
The estimates are with magnetic tape, which includes VHS, but it also includes all these high-end things that are at CSU in the Clark building. You know, the 1-inch tapes, the 3/4-inch tapes, the Beta SP tapes. You know, there's probably some 8,000 tapes sitting in Clark that we didn't even get a chance to get to.
Yeah, and that's a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot that needs to be done in the future. Sure.
Yeah, that's another reason why it needs to be done as you do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Because when you leave it alone for so long, it's just something you can't take care of anymore.
Sure, sure. Well, I got a question for each one of you. I'll go around the table, and is, how do you see this film as being a long-lasting legacy for the school, its alumni, its supporters, and its future CSU graduates? So I'll start with Ed and Jackie.
Well, you know, incoming freshmen used to wear little beanies. Now we're going to, you know, give them a link to the history of CSU. And I think that along with all of our other funky little traditions that we all love, I think that should be part of any introduction to Colorado State University.
That's a great way to put it. My brother threw me a Professor Hanson's book when I was a freshman, and he said, "Learn about my school. I graduated from here. You learn about it." Perfect example. This, if you don't have time to read it, you've got an hour and a half to watch it. So that's great. Blake, did you have anything on that?
I mean, I feel like the film and the way that we all approached it really has a classic storytelling approach that I think will hold up over time. And, you know, like you said, I really believe that people, you know, they come to a place like this, they can learn so much about it. And then it kind of puts everybody in the mindset of preserving the history moving forward. So I think it's a great thing that should be used. And I hope the school continues to kind of push it for especially history students, but also just anybody, you know, that comes here and actually that lives in Fort Collins, because there's a lot of great Fort Collins history in the film as well.
Yeah.
Sure. I showed my kids Council Tree, and they said, "That's where Target is." You know, what Council Tree was, and I had to explain it to them. So perfect example there. Jackie, did you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. Frank, how about, you know, what do you see as the long-lasting legacy for alumni and for future students?
I think that this film, speaking from the entire team and all the students that were involved and all the people that were involved, you can really see the love and the effort that went into trying to tell a story that people are going to be able to watch 50 years from now, 100 years from now. You know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention one person. There's so many, but one that really was involved from the very beginning, and Blake will back me on this in terms of accuracy and whatnot, but that was the historians that got involved. You know, Dr. Hanson, for example, Jim Hanson, Gordon Hazard, Barbara Fleming, Wayne Sundberg. And then there's a kind of an unsung hero in the Special Collections Library. Her name is Vicky Lopez Terrell. And every picture that you saw in that documentary was found by her. And she was the person we would go to and say, "Vicky, I need this." And all of a sudden she'd say, "Here it is." She's also the one that found the original 1919 film footage that you and I know so much about. The original version that I saw was on 3/4 inch. That told us that we knew something existed. Then we found a 16mm version. And then doing my research, I found out that there were no 16 millimeters back in 1919. So where's the original? And I went to Vicky and I said, Vicky, is there any film canister anywhere in the Special Collections Library that you don't know? Well, we just had this 16 millimeter one in there. And I said, well, let's take a look at it. It was the 35 millimeter one. So I think that the legacy of this film is going to go way beyond the 150 years. It's going to go beyond 2020, and it's going to be something that I think CSU people and Fort Collins people are going to be proud of for many, many years to come.
Yeah, I have a bunch of Vicky folders on my computer still.
Well, when I wrote my book 11 years ago, Vicky was the one who helped me find athletic pictures. So
Yeah.
anybody who's ever
And
been
you
in special
too.
collections, they know Vicky very well. So yes, I can understand how
John,
incredibly-
you gave me some gems too, and really helped us dial in the sports stuff. It was so great to work with you.
Yeah,
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, just to kind of wrap things up, I'm going to go around the horn and just have each one of you add in just another thought about the film, some other, thoughts for people who are listening in to us tonight, and anything else about the 150 anniversary. So we'll start with Blake.
Yeah, I just really proud of this film and what we accomplished, and in really kind of a short period of time when you look at it, because there was so much involved, and trying to break it all down. And I feel like the feedback we've gotten from all the alumni and different people has been super positive, and I'm just really proud of this project and being a part of it. Thank you, Jackie and Ed and Frank and all you people that have been involved in this project. I feel really blessed to tell the story. My dad was a big part of CSU.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Ed and Jackie, anything to kind of wrap things up?
I think it's a great piece of advertising for ag schools all around the nation. And I think it's a good example for them to maybe take a look at their own history.
Yeah.
And I'm not old enough to have slopped the hogs. I just like to say one thing. Frank there, filmmaker, has just been hired as a documentary producer for Rocky Mountain Student Media. He is going to continue his documentary filmmaking, working even more directly with students. We have developed a partnership with Rocky Mountain PBS, our public television, regional public television station. This joint venture is going to produce a lot of wonderful products. Students are going to get a huge advantage over their peers because they will be producing stuff that is actually produced on regional television. And we look forward to working on our next documentaries with Frank.
Great. And Frank, we'll finish with you. Any final thoughts on the whole project and everything as it was and how we can move forward and whatnot?
I'm going to bring it right to the very beginning when you first brought this up and said that, that I was not an alumni and I came to this thing new. I fell in love with CSU. I fell in love with the Oval. I fell in love with the story. I felt that meeting people like Blake and Robbie and the CSI team and working with people like Vicky, Lopez, Terrell, and the deans were very helpful in terms of wanting this story to be told. I just feel like I learned not just a lot about CSU, but I learned to love CSU, and I kind of have an appreciation for why the alumni are so proud of this university. You have a reason to be proud. For whatever is being said today out in the world about what's going on in the world, this university proved that it is really at the forefront. And as I said to so many people from the very beginning, Ed Warner came up with the title, The Great Experiment. And I think that for all of you alumni out there, now that you're celebrating 150 years, keep in mind, it's still an experiment. There was one of the first things that I think connected with Tony Frank when I first presented the idea to him was that there was never a blueprint for this. This was not Yale, this was not Harvard. There was no blueprint for a land grant university. And CSU really had to figure out, well, Colorado A&M had to figure out how do we actually make a college that's open to everybody. And this documentary proves two things. One, that it did a pretty good job of it, but it's still an ongoing process.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on behalf of the Alumni Association. We also thank you for listening to the filmmakers of the Great Experiment with CSU at 150. Rocky Mountain PBS will be trying to re-show it here soon. Look for some emails coming from the Alumni Association to let you all know when that's going to happen. But for tonight, thank you very much. And everybody, go Rams.
Go Rams. Thank you, John.
You bet. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So I guess we leave now.
I don't know. Lisa's got to tell us.
Oh,